Thank you. We now come to the backbench debate on Horizon settlement and future governance of Post Office Limited. Mr Kevin Jones to move.
Madam Deputy Speaker. Innocent people jailed, individuals having their good name and livelihoods taken away from them, the full use of the state and its finances to persecute individuals. These are all characteristics that we recognise of a totalitarian or police state. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, that's exactly what we've seen in the 21st century in the way in which government and Post Office have dealt with sub-postmasters and their use of the Horizon system. Yep. The Horizon system was the biggest non-military IT project in Europe. It cost over £1 billion to install and affected 18,000 post offices throughout the UK. And before I go on, I'd just like to pay tribute to some individuals I think have been, I've been working long and hard with now on this campaign. The first who can't be here today is the Honourable Member for North West Leicestershire, who, unfortunately, because I think a family member is ill, he is asked to self-isolate. But he has been with me from the start on this in terms of trying to get justice, and I will refer into some of his work later on. But I'd just like to put that on the record, Madam Speaker. He would like to have been here and gives his apologies. That doesn't show that in any way he's not interested in this outcome. The other one is James Arbuthnot, the former member for North East Hampshire, who, despite being moved up to God's waiting room further along the corridor, has still consistently pressed the case for justice for some postmasters. And I'd like to pay tribute to the work that he's done in the past, but also done now. The other two individuals is Alan Bates, who is the lead claimant in terms of the justice for sub-postmasters class action. Alan has been a stalwart and stuck by, knowing, as he said, I'm right and I'm going to make sure we get the truth out. The other one, who has shone a spotlight on this very helpfully, and has spent many hours, I think, sitting through the long court case, is Nick Wallace, a journalist who I think has been able to show and keep this in the public domain. And they deserve credit for their continued actions now, but also their work in the past. Now, I first came to be involved in this through a constituency who came to see me at my constituency surgery, Tom Brown. Tom, like many other thousands of sub-postmasters, was a hard-working, well-respected individual. He'd won awards from the Post Office when he fought off an armed robber in his post office. But because of the Horizon system that was introduced, he was accused of stealing £84,000 from the Post Office. Even though he said that and demonstrated that this was not the case, they took him to court. He went through the agony of being publicly shamed in terms of his local community, because remember, a lot of these individuals are the stalwarts in their local communities. He got to court at the Newcastle Crown Court, and on the day of the trial, the Post Office withdrew the case. The damage, Madam Deputy Speaker, had already been done for him. His good name had been ruined, and he'd lost, because he then had to go bankrupt, in excess of nearly £500,000 in terms of his business, his bungalow, his he bought for his retirement, and some investment properties. He now lives with his son in South Stanley in social housing. So the man that should have had a nice retirement, who was well respected in his community, has been completely ruined and is destitute. Despite that, he came to see me last week. He is an individual who's still got integrity, because he's always insisted he was innocent of what he was accused of. And he has not been alone. The estimate, we've got 555 in terms of the class action taken. There are many others, some unfortunately who have died since the case was taken forward. And the scandal of this, Madam Deputy Speaker, which is what makes me so angry and why I've persistently hung onto this campaign, is the Post Office knew all along that the Horizon system was flawed.
Certainly. And congratulations for being for this very important debate. Is the other scandal in this, though, the fact that the courts, time and time again, failed the victims? In the prosecutions that were taken forward by the Post Office, the courts found in favour of the Post Office, despite the fact they couldn't properly evidence their case. It's absolutely wrong. We must stand up for David versus Goliath in our courts.
Something my honourable friend from Hull East will refer to in his contribution. But in the board minutes in 1999, the Post Office knew there were bugs in this system. So they knew there were software problems in this system. They denied all the way through that, for example, amounts that sub-postmasters inputted could be changed. Well, that was just not true. They could be remotely done, and a member for North West Leicestershire and his constituent, Mr Rankin, who visited the headquarters where the data was being stored, proved that. And in a casket-style issue is when he raised this, Post Office, first of all, denied he'd ever visited the data centre in the first place, until he actually proved that he'd actually been there. And it was just one cover-up after another. And the denial culture in the Post Office was described by Judge Fraser, and I think it's a very good one in his judgment, is the 21st century equivalent of maintaining the earth was flat, because the evidence was there all the way through. And there's no way in which anyone who had an objective look at the system, both in terms of the Post Office or Fujitsu, the contractor, could actually argue that this system was perfect. And we had a situation... Certainly.
Has it also come to light that the people who were fixing the system from behind the scenes that you mentioned were able to go in and balance the tills, as it were? It came to light that they were incentivised and paid to be speedy and quickly fix the issues behind the scenes, which then made a lot of these cases even worse. So balances that were already poor then got even worse.
Well, they did, but it was worse than that. The Post have denied it could, for many years, denied it could actually ever be done. And it was only when in 2011, after campaigning by myself and others, that the Post Office had the forensic accountant's second sight to look at, which discovered exactly what the honourable gentleman has just outlined. But what did the Post Office do? They set up a mediation service, but still denied that there was any problem, even though the evidence was there. In terms of the operator Fujitsu, they knew there were glitches. And I've got to say, Madam Speaker, they're as guilty as the Post Office in terms of this cover-up. And I think if you look at the judgment, and I can't comment on it because the judge, I think, has referred that case possibly to the Crown Prosecution Service for their involvement in this. And I don't really want to go into that detail, but Fujitsu have got a lot to answer for.
Can I thank my honourable friend for giving way? And he's outlining a litany of maladministration, at the very least, by these. Have any individuals, either at Post Office Limited or at Fujitsu in the management level, ever been held accountable for this?
Well, I'll come on to that. It's a very good point. Completely the opposite. Most have been promoted, and in one case, appointed as a government advisor when she left the Post Office. But this denial then led the postmasters to get the group action together. 555 took the Post Office to court. And the situation was that the Post Office was still denying that there was a problem when it went into court. And this has been the consistent approach which they have taken in terms of denying any type of liability. Now, can I just come on to the role of the Post Office? Because there's a role of the Post Office and the role of government as well. The Post Office is an arm's length body from government, but the sole shareholder is the government. It has a shareholder representative on the board. And despite that, millions of pounds of public money is spent every year. In fact, it is a nationalised company, whether we like it or not. But we're unable, as parliamentarians, to scrutinise it. For example, in spite of knowing what they knew, it is estimated the Post Office spent between 100 and 120 million pounds defending the indefensible in court. And that was designed, basically, to see if they could whittle down the case so that the other side ran out of money. But trying to account for that and trying to get the post office to be scrutinised is virtually impossible, because when I've asked parliamentary questions, they get referred to the post office. Now, I shall come on to the role of ministers in a minute. I'm sorry the member for Kingston's left his seat, because he was one person I would like to have been here to answer, so he could answer what his role or lack of role in when he was the minister. So it falls between this private company and a public company. But then you've had individuals, and Honourable for Worley raises about individuals. Paula Vanells was the chief executive of the post office. She left last year and knew, obviously as a board member, of all what was going on, the strategy in terms of the court case, but also the bugs that took place. So what happens? She gets a CB in the New Year's Honours list for services to the post office. Now that's just rubbing salt in the wounds of these innocent people. Now there is a case that she should have that removed. How she actually got it in the first place when the court case was ongoing, I would like to know. Added to that, she's also now chair of Imperial College Healthcare Trust. Again, I would like to ask why and what due diligence they did on her as an individual if that was the case. In addition, in a minute.
Excellent speech, and for all his stoical determination in trying to get to the bottom of this. Is he also aware, on the point that he's just made, that the head of Fujitsu UK is now working in the Cabinet Office?
I don't know whether the Honourable Lady is actually reading what I'm coming on the Cabinet Office now. Because, lo and behold, guess where Paula Vanells also ended up? She was a non-executive member of the Cabinet Office. I'm also told that she was removed yesterday from that post. I don't know whether it's because of this debate today, but I welcome that. But, why is it that someone who's overseen this absolute scandal is allowed to still hold public positions? Worse than that, and I do respect individuals who have religious faith, and she does. She's a priest. Now, I'm sorry, the way she's dealt with these individuals, like my constituent, can't be described as very Christian in the way in which she's treated them. Certainly, I think she wouldn't pass the Good Samaritan test in terms of how she has just ignored their pleas. And I just hope she actually thinks about those individuals like Tom, who have lost their livelihoods, are living in social housing now through her actions. And it does anger me that these individuals have gone scot-free, and that's what needs. These people do need to be answerable for their actions.
Thank my honourable friend for giving way, and maybe she fulfils the role of the Pharisee in that parable. But doesn't this also speak to a deeper problem that we have inside our society, where relentlessly, time after time, the great and the good look after each other, hand out these positions to each other, irrespective of whether they have actually been in any way successful or massive failure. And we see this particularly in the health service, where appointments are moved around and people move from job to job, taking payments each time they go and leaving a catastrophic failure. Isn't this a deeper failure in the system?
It is, but how could somebody be given a CBE knowing that this scandal was out there? How could somebody be appointed to the non-executive board of the Cabinet Office and the Healthcare Trust knowing that what's coming out in this court case? I just find that absolutely remarkable. But then there's the role of government. The Honourable Member for Kingston, upon certain when he was the Minister, said, the Post Office continues to express full confidence in the integrity and the robustness of the Horizon system, and also categorically states there is no remote access to the system or individual branch terminals which allows accounts to take place. This, despite a board minute of 2009, which actually said that remote access could be actually done. So what his role in is, I don't know. He clearly didn't ask very many searching questions of the Post Office. And then it comes on to how we scrutinise the Post Office, because I have put numerous written parliamentary questions down, and because it's an arm's length body, Bez is actually shift them over to the Post Office. It's arm's length, therefore it's nothing to do with them. And I'm sorry, Madam Speaker, there's a case here to actually how we actually get the Post Office to actually. The latest one this week is I asked a question about what the complex case review team is in the Post Office. my able assistant rang Biz and said, "What is it?" They didn't even know about it. The parliamentary question put down is that we moved to justice. They don't know what it is. But I know last week it settled 2 cases out of court, each for £300,000. This is public money, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we're talking about here. And we need full scrutiny. So I'd love to see if the Minister can shed any light on what organisation actually is. Then we come on to the role of ministers. I've already mentioned the member for Kingston. There's also the member for... so there was also Joe Swinson, Claire Perry, and the immediate predecessor to this minister, the member for Rochester, all who completely believed what they were being told by the Post Office, never asked any questions in terms of how public money was being spent, and allowed the Post Office to continue in what they've done. And government can't say it didn't know about this, because when the new government came in 2010, myself, James Arbuthnot, and the Honourable Member for Leicester East, went to see Oliver Letwin, who was then the Cabinet Minister, and actually put our case to him. He had sympathy to it because he had a similar case in his constituency. So what happened to it? Nothing happened at all. So there's clearly a issue here that the government cannot hide behind. We now come on to the issue around compensation.
Frank, if I just on that point, I'm very grateful to my honourable friends, and he's making an excellent case for what's happened. I just wanted to raise with him this issue about not being able to get to find out what happened as an MP. And it struck me that the Bishop of Liverpool, in the Hillsborough inquiry, he talked about the patronising disposition of unaccountable power. And it seems to me that this is another classic case of exactly that. And I just also wanted to put on record how grateful my constituent, Janet Skinner, is to the fact that members of Parliament, like my honourable friend and others, have pursued this for many years to try and get justice for these people.
Can I thank my honourable friend for that? And I couldn't... I think it's a great description that she's used there. But then we come on to compensation. The action was set... in a minute, yeah. Oh, sorry.
Giving way. He mentioned the issue of ministers. Of course, the Post Office has a non-executive director appointed by the government. One must assume that that non-executive director is reporting to government ministers. Would that not be an interesting topic of inquiry?
Yes, and I was going to come on to that, because I'd love to know who they have been over the years and what they actually said to ministers. Because we do actually need to know what... if I'd have been the minister, for example, I'm sure he would have been as well. He'd have had that person in and actually scrutinised what was going on. Certainly in the last few months, in terms of the millions, hundreds of millions of pounds being spent defending the indefensible. But in terms of the settlement, which was agreed in December, it was £57 million that the Post Office agreed to do. Unfortunately, most of that has been swallowed up in the fees that the after-event insurance that the litigants had to put forward. Now, I do not criticise the lawyers and people who funded this, because without them, we would not have got justice. But that leaves around approximately £15,000 for each of the successful people in the class action. Remember, my constituent has lost over £500,000. The government, the Post Office, are settling cases outside this at £300,000. What has got to happen now, is a scheme has to be set up to actually compensate individuals properly. And remember, £15 million of those costs are for legal costs for the pursuing the case. £4 million of that are VAT, which will go straight back to the government. And when you think that Paula Vanel's, over the time she was at the Post Office, earned nearly £5 million, you're just showing here the way in which the individuals that have been affected are not having happy retirements and peace of mind, but have been put through this system. So, the issue is quite clear to me that the figures that are being paid out now privately need a scheme. Can I just come on to two other points before I finish? One is the role of the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters. This organisation needs winding up now. It is not independent. Nobody joins it. You're auto-enrolled if you're a sub-postmaster. It's basically an arm of the Post Office, and it's paid for by the Post Office. surely if you are going to be an independent voice for sub-postmasters, you should be that. And if anyone saw the Business Select Committee last week and saw the Chief Executive, who couldn't answer how many people, how many of his members had actually been affected by Horizon or what they'd done about it, well, I'll tell exactly what he did. Nothing, because in Tom Brown's case, they just said the Post Office must be right. This organisation is a sham. It needs winding up now. We need an independent organisation to represent sub-postmasters, including the recognition, for example, of the CWU, which some people are members of, so that they can actually be an independent voice for sub-postmasters. The other issue which both myself and the member from North West Leicestershire and James Buthnott did was take the cases to the criminal case review body in some cases, because there are people that have been found guilty, in some cases jailed unfairly. I've got to pay tribute to them. They did take this seriously and took on a number of cases. They stayed them, quite rightly in my opinion, until the outcome of the civil litigation. It's now important to, I think now, that they move them on to actually look at them, because I think there are miscarriages of justice in some of those cases that do need to be put right very quickly. The other issue which needs removing from the Post Office is the right of the Post Office to take their own prosecutions. This goes back many centuries in terms of the Post Office's history. But when people like Tom Brown actually asked, could he get the police or the CPS involved, looking at the evidence against him, he was told no. Likewise, everyone else was the same. So that needs taken, that's something the government could do straight away, because there's not adequate oversight of how these were being prosecuted. In Judge Fraser's summing up in terms of his case, he described the contract and the way in which the Post Office acted as a capricious or arbitrary way in which would not be unfamiliar to a mid-Victorian factory owner, and appears to conduct itself as though it is answerable only to itself. And that is the case here. It was answerable only to itself, with no or, well, little or no insight in terms of oversight from government. In conclusion, can I say what needs to be put right now? Well, I've already mentioned about compensation needs to be put in place. We now need a full independent inquiry. The Prime Minister, in response to PMQs on the 26th of February, indicated that this might be the case and called the issue a scandal. Lord Callaghan, in response to Lord Arbuthnot on the 5th of May in the other place, said that this would be under consideration. We need to do that as a matter of urgency to cover, not just in terms of what's gone on, but actually how we can actually improve the situation for the future. And it's got to be independent of government. I know the Base Select Committee is actually looking into this, and credit to them for doing that. But we need some recommendations in terms of what went on in the past. And as my right honourable friend for Worley said, I'm sorry, we need to just expose who did what. And if, I've got to say, in some cases, what I would argue would be criminal activity took place, they need to be prosecuted. Yeah. They certainly need to be removed from any public bodies which they currently sit on for their involvement in this. Now, I'll just say this to the Minister. His predecessors have not been good at looking at this. They've not asked the right questions. They've not, I think, asked the questions of their officials or the Post Office. He has a chance now to put this right. I know he spoke to Alan Bates yesterday, and I know he's hiding behind the court case in terms of the compensation. His officials are saying they can't get any more. I've got to say, please don't do that. It's now time for bold action. If we don't do that, this injustice will continue on. And I'll just finish on this one point. Tom Brown, my constituent, should be enjoying a happy, well-funded retirement. He's not. He's still a proud man, as I said, a man who has not lost his dignity, but he's actually living in social housing with his son when he should have been and that's not his fault. That's down to people like Paula Vanells at the Post Office and the board, and the failure and cover-ups which have been, I think, perpetrated by individuals and actually turned a blind eye to by government who should have stood up for him.
The question is, as on the order paper, it will be obvious that we have just over an hour left for this debate, which isn't long. I hope that we can manage without a time limit, which we can if everyone takes around 5 to 6 minutes. That doesn't mean 7 to 8 minutes, but between 5 and 6 minutes. Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'll try and complete my contribution in even less than 6 or 7 minutes. The honourable gentleman from Durham North has given a very comprehensive background to this case, one that I think most of us who are taking part in this debate will be very familiar. We have met constituents whose lives have been destroyed. It's not too strong a word by this sort of action. I've got 6 constituents who are decent, honest, hard-working individuals, indeed public servants, and their lives have been wrecked. Their homes, in some cases, their homes have been lost, and some with a criminal conviction. Surely the Post Office would look at these people and recognise that they haven't overnight become criminals. Why were no questions asked? In 10 years that I've been in this House, I've attended numerous debates on this, and as been said in the previous contribution, ministers have tried to wash their hands of it, if we're being absolutely honest. They've sought to stand back when clear injustices were being ignored. As Justice for some Sub-Postmasters Alliance have said, because of the tyrannical conduct of the Post Office over the years, they had no alternative to go to litigation. Scores of postmasters contacted the Post Office to tell them of discrepancies. They were not trying to hide them, hardly the actions of someone deliberately trying to engage in some sort of fraudulent activity. The judge was scathing in his remarks of the Post Office, and rightly so. The Post Office, I note, relied heavily on Section 12, Clause 12 of their contract with the sub-postmasters, and the judge rightly drew attention to this. That clause says the sub-postmaster is responsible for losses caused through his own negligence, carelessness or error, and also for all of the losses of all kinds caused by his assistant. Deficiencies due to such losses must be made good without delay. And yet the judge found it is not for the sub-postmaster to demonstrate there was negligence, carelessness or error on his or her part. It is for the Post Office to demonstrate that there is. It is only if the Post Office can demonstrate that there is a loss which falls within the scope of the clause that it is entitled to rely on that clause. As has been mentioned earlier, it is staggering that Fujitsu could access the sub-postmaster's account without his or her knowledge. And whilst one would hope that this isn't the case, that leaves it wide open to others to interfere with the entries on the account. It's perfectly obvious that Horizon is not fit for purpose. The attitude of the Post Office is a scandal and a disgrace. Successive ministers, as I said, have sought to wash their hands of this. And yes, the Post Office is arm's length, but, as has been said, the government cannot escape its share of responsibility. Circumstances have changed. Anyone who has read the judge's remarks can't avoid acknowledging that they have some responsibility. We now have a new minister in post, and he has an opportunity to show some sympathy. And as in the previous debate on IR35, this is actually about correcting an injustice. And the government, along with the legal process, have an opportunity to achieve that. The government should act without delay in instituting a full independent inquiry and compensate in full those who have suffered. Financial compensation, though, can never wholly recompense those whose lives have been utterly and totally destroyed. I, and I'm sure other members, have had people in their constituency surgery reduced to tears about how the post office has treated them. They have been diligent public servants for many, many years, and it is intolerable that they have ended up in this situation. I urge the Minister to take action on this, and as quickly as possible.
Carl Turner.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I begin by congratulating my right honourable friend, the member for North Durham, for securing and moving this debate. Him and I have had discussions over the years about this case, which is just a massive scandal, the likes that I've not seen before. Prior to my election to this House in 2010, I prosecuted and defended in criminal proceedings from my local chambers in Holland. Prior to that, I worked with a firm of criminal solicitors, and it was there that I met Janet Skinner, who is the constituent of my honourable friend, the member for Hull North. Janet Skinner was prosecuted by the Post Office for dishonesty offences, theft, fraud and other related offences. Now, I took Janet Skinner's instructions. It was a very brief encounter from memory, probably a conference between her and myself which would have lasted no more than 20 minutes. But I remember her instructions then, and indeed she's reminded me of them since. She couldn't understand why she was being accused of dishonesty. Now, when she explained the situation to me, it was clear that what she'd done, if anything, was the offence of false accounting. Why? Because when the sheet didn't balance, she would ring the helpline, and the helpline would tell her and other postmasters, mistresses off the record, you just need to make the books balance. Effectively, make up numbers. Put the information in, then you can close the system down for the night and trade the next day. Utterly disgusting. And the analogy that I thought of, Madam Deputy Speaker, is this. It's a bit like being trapped in a burning building. You ring the emergency services, you explain the situation, you're advised to smash a window to escape the building, and once you have, then you are eventually prosecuted for criminal damage. That's the scenario. It's not a perfect analogy, certainly not for a criminal lawyer, because there is an inbuilt defence in criminal damage of reasonable excuse. But I'll not get into that. Now, Janet Skinner was a woman of good character, no previous convictions. She reminded me recently of the fact that she'd never even had so much as a parking ticket to a name. But when she sat down with the probation officer for the pre-sentence report, the report wasn't going to be a good one. Why? Because she would have said, I didn't do anything. When she was asked, is she sorry? She would say, no, I'm not sorry because I don't think I've done anything wrong. So when the judge comes to sentencing, I didn't represent her in the sentencing hearing as it happens, but when she would have been sentenced, the judge would have been questioning whether she was likely to commit further offences as a result of the fact that she was showing no culpability whatsoever, and she wasn't sorry. She wasn't sorry because she'd done nothing wrong. We now subsequently know she shouldn't have been investigated, she shouldn't have been interviewed, she certainly shouldn't have been prosecuted. We now know she shouldn't have pled guilty to false accounting, and she certainly shouldn't have gone to prison for 9 months. Now, since I've been involved in representing those victims of this scandal, I've been contacted by other sub-postmasters and I received a few days ago some documents which are just startling. So, in 2006, a sub-postmaster was prosecuted. I have documents showing discussions between lawyers within the post office conceding that there was no theft, no dishonesty, no fraud, no false accounting in this particular case I'm talking about, yet she was prosecuted in any event. It is utterly disgusting. Now, when this person found out that these documents existed because they'd been leaked to her, she asked the post office whether they would be producing those documents to the Criminal Cases Review Commission. And she was met with aggression from the post office, the likes of I have never seen. She was told that those documents were privileged and that if they were leaked, she could be in serious trouble. Bullying, aggression, constant lies from the very beginning, lie after lie after lie. And I'm prepared to concede this, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've read Mr Justice Fraser's judgment, and actually it is a pleasure to read. When you read that judgment, it's clear that lies were constantly told. And I'm prepared to accept that ministers and government officials were misled from the very top of the post office and Fujitsu. So what do we do now to put matters right? Of course.
Does this not just underline the simple fact in all of this that the post office only consideration in all of this was to protect their reputation at the total cost of the injustice that so many people faced?
I'm grateful to the honourable member, Madam Deputy Speaker. Look, I've described this as the most grotesque version of predatory capitalism I ever have seen. Why? Because £1 billion was invested, and those senior officials within the post office and Fujitsu did everything they could possibly do to protect themselves. They knew, let's be absolutely clear about that, they knew that there were victims at the very bottom who were potentially, and in fact had already at that point, gone to prison. It is utterly disgusting. So, of course.
I'm grateful to him for allowing my intervention. I too have a constituent exactly the same situation as he has described, who was 18 years old and sent to Holloway for 6 months, accused of theft and for failing to apologise to the grannies she was supposed to have stolen from. She still has not had her name cleared, and she has been waiting 5 years for the Criminal Cases Review Commission to do that.
Honourable Lady, she's absolutely right. These postmasters were respected in the community. You know, the post office is a respected organisation which we should all be incredibly proud of, and that was part of the problem. The post office were believed, the lies that ministers and officials and everybody else were told along the lines were believed as well. And that's why, Madam Deputy Speaker, only a judge-led inquiry will possibly sort this out. We need to know who knew what they knew, and when they knew it, and why they acted as they did. I just want to say something briefly about one of those senior people within the post office, Paula Venables. I don't know Paula Venables, but I know that she apparently earned something in the region of £5 million over a 6-year period. I believe, wholeheartedly, Madam Deputy Speaker, that she would have had a very good inkling as to what was going on at the time. This is utterly scandalous, and a judge will be the person who can get to the bottom of this.
David Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I also congratulate the Right Honourable Member for North Durham and my honourable friend, the Member for North West Leicestershire, on securing this debate. I have the privilege of representing here Mr. Alan Bates, who was the lead claimant in the proceedings that were settled in December. And if it had not been for his tenacity and the tenacity of others, the consequences would have been that the wrongdoings of the Post Office and Fujitsu would have gone undetected. And the reputations of many hundreds of completely decent, innocent people would have been completely destroyed without any hope of being repaired. Now, it's clear from the judgments delivered last year by Mr. Justice Fraser that the Horizon system was at all relevant times defective. It was clear also that the Post Office, and I would suggest by extension the directors of the Post Office, and I would suggest by further extension the government-appointed director of the Post Office, must have been aware that the system was defective. And notwithstanding that, for over 20 years, the Post Office stubbornly and aggressively continued to assert that the system was fit for purpose. Many innocent sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses lost their livelihoods. Some of them went bankrupt. Some of them were prosecuted, and indeed some of them were sent to prison. It's an absolutely scandalous tale. And it is indeed a credit to Mr. Nick Reed, who is the new chief executive of the Post Office, that his intervention helped achieve the settlement to the legal dispute last December. But that settlement cannot be the end of the matter. The government cannot simply regard that settlement as putting the Horizon issue to bed. As other honourable members have pointed out, after costs are taken into account, the settlement sums for those 500-plus litigants will be paltry. So I believe that the government has a duty to further compensate the sub-postmasters who have been so appallingly treated by a government-owned company. And I will be brief because I know that others wish to speak, but there is a vehicle that exists that could be used to pay that compensation. The Post Office operates a suspense account for unallocated money, and I would suggest that given the history that we've heard today, there's rather a lot of unallocated money in the Post Office. According to a 2015 report issued by Second Sight, unreconciled balances for the 2014 financial year were approximately £96 million in respect of the Bank of Ireland ATMs and approximately £66 million in respect of Santander. Now, Bank of Ireland and Santander are just two of approximately 170 so-called client accounts operated by the Post Office. Now, the question of how much has been going into the Post Office's profit and loss account from unreconciled balances will clearly have to be a matter for further inquiry. However, it should surely be a source available to repay the costs of the claimants in these court proceedings. To summarise, Madam Deputy Speaker, the government, I believe, owes a significant debt, both financial and moral, to the wronged sub-postmasters as a consequence of the deplorable conduct of those who were responsible for the direction of the Post Office, including, I would suggest, non-executive directors appointed by the government. Ministers should ensure that that debt is discharged as quickly and as fully as possible. And whilst it is pleasing to hear assurances from ministers, as we have, that they recognise that in the future the Post Office needs to do more to strengthen its relationship with postmasters and regain public trust, it would even be more pleasant to hear that they are making arrangements to compensate the claimants as quickly and as fully as possible. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, may I say that I fully support the calls for an independent inquiry, and I suggest that the government really has a moral obligation to deliver that.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Post Office Horizon scandal must rank as one of the most shocking and badly handled ever. The impact it has had on honest, hard-working sub-postmasters has been truly devastating and life-changing for them, and even the compensation won by the sub-postmasters in their class action against the Post Office will do very little to replace the lost years of pain and suffering and social stigma of being classed a criminal when all these people set out to do was earn an honest living. One of those affected was my constituent Kamran Ashraf, whose wife was a sub-postmaster, and together they ran the business. Right from the beginning, Using the Horizon software provided by the Post Office, there were shortfalls. In September 2003, the Post Office carried out an audit of their branch and found a shortfall of £25,000. Following an investigation, the Post Office prosecuted Cameron and his wife. But because they had 2 small children, even though they'd done nothing wrong, Cameron decided to plead guilty so that their children would not risk having both their parents being incarcerated. In February 2004, he was sentenced to 9 months' imprisonment at Kingston Crown Court, and to add insult to injury, he was fined £25,000. Cameron and his wife lost their business, they lost their home, and had to enter into an individual voluntary arrangement to pay off creditors. Because of his conviction, Cameron struggled to find work, and although now his conviction is spent, he has found employment, he still has that stain on his reputation because his conviction has not been overturned. In August 2015, Cameron happened to chance on the BBC Panorama TV programme, which highlighted other cases identical to his, where sub-postmasters were prosecuted and convicted due to shortfalls in their takings following an audit. Dozens of sub-postmasters were affected and came forward and formed an action group called the Justice for Sub-Postmasters Alliance, or JFSA for short. The JFSA, led by Alan Bates, brought the class action with a total of 557 sub-postmasters, which was vigorously fought by the Post Office. And on the 11th of December 2019, the sub-postmasters were awarded £57.75 million in damages. My right honourable friend, the member for North Durham, is quite right when he says that the biggest scandal of all was the fact that the Post Office denied that there was any flaw in the system and knew all along there was a problem whilst innocent people were sent to prison.
One other thing the Post Office must have known all along was that there was this huge spike in postmasters and postmistresses being reported and being prosecuted, so they didn't know that they weren't alone in the matter, but the Post Office presumably knew that all this was going on at scale.
And makes an excellent point. Many of these cases rely on evidence, and the evidence about the infallibility of the system would have led to the conviction of these sub-postmasters. And that is why I think we need to look how this progresses further. Whilst after the trial, the Post Office chairman conceded that they had got things wrong in the past, the fact was that the Post Office were fighting the action until the bitter end, and that speaks volumes.
And for allowing me to intervene on him. Does he agree with me that the way the Post Office conducted themselves throughout the litigation process was shameful in terms of trying to grind down the claimants so they would withdraw their claim?
She's absolutely right. The Post Office seemed to have unlimited funds at their disposal to fight this action, whereas the sub-postmasters had to collectively breathe the action together and rely on the support from free solicitors to get them through the case. The Post Office is an arm's-length organisation, but there seems to be no accountability for their actions. And this is a matter, and in this matter, there seems to be no scrutiny, despite them receiving public money for their functions. And although the civil action may be over, the nightmare still continues for my constituents. Cameron is still trying to get his conviction overturned. The Criminal Cases Review Commission Board are meant to be meeting next week to discuss what steps they'll be taking, and I'm not sure if that will actually be going ahead, but I hope it does. He's also still considering further civil action, and he's not alone. And after having been failed by the legal system, it seems that justice is now finally being done, but at a very slow pace. I therefore invite the Minister to do whatever it takes to get justice for the sub-postmasters, and I also join the call for an independent, judge-led public inquiry into this quite shocking scandal.
Jerome Mayhew.
Mr. Speaker. Scandals come and scandals go, and both as a former barrister and as a new member of this House, it's all too easy when we see this raft of paperwork coming across our desks to scan through the details and forget that each of these scandals is made up of individual cases, individual human stories. So I beg the indulgence of the House if I can just reprise the story of Siobhan Sayer, who is a constituent of mine, who 14 years ago was a sub-post mistress and had trouble balancing her accounts. Now, she didn't hide this issue, she highlighted this issue, and she asked for help. She asked for help from the post office. And eventually that help came in the form of 3 auditors who didn't assist her in balancing the books. Instead, they suspended her, they accused her of theft, they searched her house, asking her where she'd hidden the money. And then they interrogated her to such an extent that it only stopped when she physically collapsed. Now, it didn't end there, because they then took the further step of prosecuting her, both for theft and for false accounting. And that young lady was pressurised to plead guilty to the lesser charge of false accounting in order to avoid a prison sentence for theft. And as a former barrister, I can understand why, faced with the seemingly impenetrable evidence of a robust system in the form of Horizon, that advice might have been given. So she did, and she was sentenced to 10 months imprisonment, suspended for 2 years, and 200 hours of community service. That is terrible. That is a true scandal. But it's worse than that, because she was shamed in her community. She was ostracised by her friends, and it hit her mental and emotional health to such an extent that she was unable to leave her home for 2 years. That is the consequence of the actions and inactions of the post office and their servants Fujitsu. So why did this happen? It undoubtedly happened because the post office didn't care to believe in the honesty of its own staff. They refused to believe that the system could be wrong despite their own evidence mounting up to the contrary. And bizarrely, with pleasure.
I found what is completely remarkable. In 1999, the Post Office Board actually had a minute which actually says that they knew that the system had its faults.
Absolutely inexplicable. And it lasted right up into the evidence heard last year by Mr. Justice Fraser. Because he said it, as mentioned earlier, it's rather like the Flat Earth Society, a refusal to believe the facts, even their own facts. But there's a strong suspicion that it went further than a refusal to believe, but it was actually a question of dishonesty. And particularly in the evidence given by Fujitsu, the learned judge, Mr. Justice Fraser, expressed serious concerns about the veracity of that evidence and took the very unusual step, and it is a very unusual step, to refer the evidence to the Director of Public Prosecutions to consider whether he thought criminal prosecutions should follow. So this matter was only discovered by the brave actions, the tenacious actions of the victims themselves over a 10-year period, faced by unending delaying tactics and cost-increasing tactics by the Post Office. That Post Office... Yes, Emma.
I'm extremely grateful to him for giving way, and I think he's making an excellent speech. Does he agree with me that sub-postmasters and mistresses are at the absolute heart of many local communities, and they deserve not only that they have the respect of those communities, but they deserve the respect of the Post Office and people in authority. And this whole sorry saga shows a complete and utter lack of respect and a lack of trust, and it is deeply, deeply disappointing, and indeed, as he suggests, maybe deeply wrong.
I entirely agree with all the comments of my honourable friend. It's the very fact that postmistresses and postmasters are at the heart of the community that the devastation to their reputations is all the worse when they were unjustly accused by their employer of dishonesty and theft. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to conclude by imploring the government not to hide behind the corporate veil This is, albeit an arm's length, it is a part of government. It's part of BEIS, this organisation. It's been referred to already in this debate as an example of unaccountable power, and I fully endorse that statement. It is a part of a wider problem we have with quangos and the lack of accountability in quangos throughout our society. And it leaves us open to only one really sensible solution to this, which is a judicial-led inquiry that has the power to investigate who knew what and when, to give justice to these people and to award real compensation.
Baker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I spoke in the Westminster Hall debate back on the 5th of March, and I said in that debate that I had a declaration of interest. Now, may I declare that I was once a postmaster, and in 2015 was somewhat of a pin-up for the post office when I won the Retail Oscars Postmaster of the Year. Which was really, I should say, I couldn't sell a stamp, but the team that drove that were the ones that should take all of that honour. But anyway, I resigned as a director from the company that ran those post offices, and I have no interests, and none of my post office or staff were affected by this scandal. I just want to make that clear. However, it is a valid point. And I wonder if anyone else in this room can claim to have been a postmaster at any point in their career. And I think it gives me a unique insight into the ability to comment on this scandal that has gone on. And as I spoke at the Westminster Hall debate, which was brought forward by our brilliant honourable member for Telford, I'm going to concentrate more on the governance issues, if I may. And I'll make 3 points in a moment. But not only have I used the Horizon system and can speak with first hand about making up the losses, which is always a worrying moment when that comes, I can also empathise utterly with the awful situation that has occurred for hundreds of innocent victims. We've heard it before, and we'll hear it time and time this afternoon, that innocent people have lost their life savings, and that young people, men and women, have been jailed and have struggled to rebuild their lives because of a criminal record. I have constituents of my own in North Norfolk who have gone through such a trauma, and their story will be every bit as dreadful as the other cases that we will hear. I very much question the point that's been made that the £58 million that's been set aside to recompense these victims, will it be enough? And I think we probably all agree that it won't after the lawyers take up a large proportion of that fund. What will be left? That is not right. The government must intervene here and make sure that, as the main shareholder, that they ensure those people are recompensed properly. The board of the Post Office Limited are unquestionably accountable for this fiasco, and action must be taken so they are properly dealt with this injustice. Straight away, what kind of corporate governance structures failed to allow this to happen? Those jailed with criminal records must have them overturned. And now I just want to turn to offer 3 governance issues that need to be put right, because these issues actually all come together and show the failings that are going on in this organisation. Firstly, the total withdrawal of the Crown network. I think it's an absolute necessity that we still have a backbone of Crown post offices in this country. We've had 600 from a few years ago, down to now just 100. And why is that relevant? Well, because systems like Horizon that went wrong, if you had a backbone of Crown post offices working effectively, they are often a testbed for new products and systems. They provide continuity in the network when so many of the franchised operations may come and go dependent on the operator's success. And the staff, remember, an organisation is only as good as the people that work in it. It's the staff that are the real holders of long-standing deep knowledge, and they should act as the wider custodians of the network. And if the Post Office had listened to its staff in the first place when they raised the flag, this perhaps wouldn't have happened. There should be an immediate moratorium on the programme of Crown disposals to ensure that the Post Office's backbone is preserved. Secondly, there is a total decimation of the wider branch network that is going on at the moment. And it remains a concern to many people, not just people that work in the Post Office, but to many communities that use the Post Office, that they are losing and that communities are losing their branches. It is not anecdotal to suggest that the number of permanent sites falls year after year. And all of the longer-term projections will see them continue to go. And that is despite the government enforcing the Post Office to not shut its branches. I just come back to my honourable friend, the member for Broadland, the eminent barrister that he is, who just spoke. And, of course, his Fakenham branch closed just around Christmas time. Now, a physical branch being lost, which has a mobile replacement, is not adequate for that community. So I really call on the Minister to make sure we get some governance in place to make sure these branches are not being lost. Please step in and try and stop these closures. These post offices are so vital in our communities. And lastly, the point I want to make goes back to remuneration of our sub-postmasters. It is really quite clear that the commissions that you earn from running a post office are so low that so many of the franchised operations now have to have a retail offering to support them. And in many rural areas where footfall is lower, and it is getting lower all the time, we need to make sure we preserve those. You're going to stop me. We want to have a vibrant network, so please look into that.
Kevin Hollinrake.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to speak in this debate, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend for bringing forward this very important debate and for his excellent speech. One thing this House does, I think, really well, across the House, it stands up for David against Goliath. And as many people will know, I've worked quite hard in terms of similar issues in the banking sector, where you see that David and Goliath issue. I think we stand up very well on both sides of the House against Goliath in these occasions. I wonder if our system does the same. And as much as there has been the issues at the Post Office and their disgraceful behaviour at the Post Office and the treatment of the sub-postmasters and mistresses has been highlighted very well here today, the question I would have is, why hasn't the courts stood up for these people through these last 10, 20 years? Because these matters have been before the court hundreds of times, yet the court has not found in favour of what people who were demonstrably innocent of these charges. And this isn't just my thoughts. Paul Marshall, who's a barrister at Cornerstone Chambers, makes out quite clearly that he feels he's looked at this across the banking sector, he's looked at this across this particular issues, and he finds that the courts are structurally biased in favour of large trusted brands in these court cases. That cannot be right. I was always brought up to believe that everybody got justice. The rules of court require the courts to maintain a fair and level playing field. Yet, as we know, the courts are open to all, just like the Ritz Hotel. There is a structural imbalance between a sub-postmaster and mistress when they go to the courts against the phalanx of lawyers that will be provided by the Post Office. And they use the courts to suppress the truth. That cannot be right. 110 prosecutions, one back in 2007, the Post Office versus Castleton, where Judge Havery found there was irrefutable evidence against Mr Castleton, despite the fact that there was no evidence. That was just his statement. There was no evidence that the Post Office was in the right. We know that the Post Office knew this was going on. After they got the second site report, the prosecution stopped at that point, of course, but they knew, but they carried on. And we've seen similar issues at Lloyds Bank, where they knew back in 2007, they knew this stuff was going on, yet they did nothing about it. They carried on as if they were in the right until it got to court 10 years later, including trying to discredit a whistleblower and the victims. The same at Royal Bank of Scotland. We've got to ask some questions of the system. Yes, of the Post Office, of course. Who knew what, when? I absolutely support the calls for public inquiry and for a proper compensation scheme. We've also got to ask questions of the solicitors involved in this who acted for the Post Office. There are some ethical issues here. The Solicitors Regulatory Authority should look into the actions of Womble Bond Dickinson, who represented the Post Office back in 2007, and all the way they knew about the second site report and continued to support the Post Office's case. And we see the same thing at Lloyds with Herbert Smith Freehills. But in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, we've got to look at the system itself, the justice system, the judiciary, the Justice Secretary, the Civil Procedure Rules Committee. They've got to learn lessons from this. Why should it take 12 years and £40 million in legal fees to get justice? That cannot be right. We must have a justice system that works for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to, as others have done, start by thanking the Right Honourable Gentleman from North Durham for applying for and securing the debate. I'll try and keep my remarks brief because I did agree that I would try and reduce my speech to allow others to get in. But as we've already heard today, ordinary men and women up and down the UK have had their lives ruined by this scandal. I certainly know of two of my own constituents who have had their lives turned upside down, and I'll speak more about the trauma and anguish that they've been put through a little later. Now, although the court case has now concluded, it is not enough to bring closure for those families, many of whom have endured 10 years, frankly, of trauma. The Justice for Sub-Postmasters Alliance, formed back in 2009, took until December just last year to get that settlement agreed. And any struggle for justice is difficult, but to be put through a decade of hardship and anguish is more than many of us would have the fortitude to endure. For my own constituent, Jacqueline El-Kasabi and her husband, it was too much. They were not part of the group legal action as they had already settled through the earlier mediation. Their story is a little different from those who went through to pursue a legal remedy, in that they just couldn't continue the fight. And who of us, of course, could blame them? Facing a bill of £36,000, the El-Kasabi family agreed to settle by paying the Post Office £10,000. The El-Kasabis knew that they had done nothing wrong, but had no fight left in them, and thinking they had no redress, just wanted to start closing that chapter in their lives. So they scraped the money together and continue to pay the mental, emotional and financial costs to this day. So what of those like the El-Kasabis who settled through mediation and were forced to pay to settle bills that were not theirs to settle? Given that we know now of the culpability of the Post Office and Fujitsu in this scandal, what action will the government take to urgently ensure justice for them? Speaking to my office last week, Jacqueline expressed the position she now faces due to the COVID-19 outbreak. She has been dealt a real double whammy in that she is losing income and is struggling to pay previous debt accrued as a result of the Horizon faults. And as a matter of the greatest urgency, will the government step in to make representations to the Post Office to ask those settlement amounts to be immediately paid back and the mediation cases now reopened? Another of my constituents, Mrs Elizabeth Barnes, was part of the group legal action. She will be receiving a payout, though she does not know how much exactly, and as others have touched on, a lot of that's going to be subsumed by legal fees. One thing is for sure, though, she will not be getting paid anywhere near as much as she deserves. Once the costs associated with funding the action are removed, claimants will receive much less than they ought to be getting. Mrs Barnes has one ask for the government, and that is to back her and the others by paying the financial funding so that she and 554 others get what they deserve. The government must take some responsibility in cleaning up this mess. There remain serious questions to be answered over this mess and oversight, and also what was known by who over the ham-fisted attempts to try and cover it up. Post Office Limited may be an arm's-length organisation, but a government shareholder sat on that board throughout the period during which this scandal occurred. Why was this saga allowed to drag on for so long when it was apparent that the issues were so widespread? Why was £100 million of public money spent defending this case when it was clear that the Post Office had no business in continuing to prosecute innocent people? And why isn't the government now taking more action in putting things right, given all of the injustices that have been laid bare, particularly this afternoon? All too often, government cites post offices as ideal replacements for bank branches who have closed, but in reality it is the Post Office Limited that struggles desperately to get sub-postmasters to take on branches. Tollcross Post Office in my own constituency, for example, was closed for almost 2 years before finally opening just in December there. And who can really be surprised that this challenge exists when the sub-postmasters have been treated so horrifically as the Elkasabys and Mrs Barnes? One other point that I wish to make is that and the need for a public inquiry. In response to the Honourable Member for Jarrow, the Prime Minister seemingly gave a commitment at PMQs to get to the bottom of this matter through such an inquiry, and I would further expect those details to be divulged by the Government today. Now, I will conclude, but I want to comment that given the sheer scale of this scandal, it's surprising that there hasn't been more media coverage. But I think of an honourable mention it should be given to the freelance journalist Nick Wallace, who has been following the case since 2010. The independent online technology outlet, The Register, also deserves a commendation for continuing to cover the story. With the campaign group up against such massively and well-funded organisations, this really has, as the Honourable Gentleman has mentioned, it's been a David and Goliath story, and it's right to put on record our appreciation to those who have ensured that the story and the plight has been reported on. And so, Madam Deputy Speaker, I very much look forward to the Minister's response today and hope that he takes this opportunity to start putting things right.
Hear, hear. Chiawara.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to congratulate the honourable members for North Durham and North West Leicestershire on securing this incredibly important debate, and particularly to commend my honourable friend, the member for North Durham, on his work on this issue over many years and his excellent opening remarks. Like him, I pay tribute to the hundreds of postmasters who have faced unimaginable hardship as a result of this scandal, and I want to celebrate the work of Alan Bates, who has helped to bring some justice for 557 sub-postmasters. Now, as we have heard from members on both sides, on all sides of the House, a truly shocking number of individuals and families have had their lives impacted by the shameful way the Post Office Limited have conducted themselves throughout this process. Hundreds of sub-postmasters have been accused of fraud, forced to pay back thousands of pounds, and faced bankruptcy and conviction. And financial compensation alone will never repair the damage caused. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, speaking myself as a former software engineer, I am upset and truly disappointed at the way in which technology has been used as an instrument of torture. An IT deployment of this kind, one of the most expensive in the history of the United Kingdom, should have had the users and the people at its heart. It should not have been turned into a living nightmare which continues for many sub-postmasters to this day. Many MPs here have told the stories of sub-postmasters from their constituency, and in Newcastle Central, sub-postmasters have suffered mental health problems brought about by this scandal. One young woman affected was still a teenager when convicted of fraud and has faced unemployment and financial ruin. As we have heard from other honourable members, she has been ostracised from her community and shunned by friends and neighbours. Sadly, her case is far from unique, and I want to pay tribute to all those who have suffered in this way. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, in December, after a long trial in which the Post Office's heavy-handed actions against its own staff came to light, it was agreed to pay £58 million settlement to the 557 sub-postmasters who brought action against them. In his verdict, Mr. Justice Fraser stated that the Post Office treated its sub-postmasters in capricious or arbitrary ways which would not be unfamiliar to a mid-Victorian factory owner. He also described its long-standing defence of the Horizon system as the 21st century equivalent of maintaining the Earth is flat. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, we appear to have a Dickensian flat Earth society running our precious network of local post offices. Regarding the Criminal Cases Review Commission, of the review of these convictions of those affected by the Horizon scandal, such an extraordinary set of circumstances requires a bespoke response. The government has parroted the Post Office's line that those wrongly convicted must each bring their own individual appeal forward. However, it's simply not right to require those already in financial ruin to incur yet more costs in the fight to clear their name. Will the government therefore consider giving the CCRC the mechanism it needs to assess the case for a group expungement of those convicted due to faults with the Horizon system? Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a government-owned company which has been found to have been at fault. It is therefore of the utmost importance that the government act to improve the corporate structure of the Post Office in order to prevent this kind of thing never happening again. More should have been done to address this issue before it was allowed to develop into the scandal it is, but all we can do now is to ensure that those wrongly convicted get justice and lessons are learned. Unfortunately, the close relationship the government has with the architects of Post Office Limited's vicious pursuit of sub-postmasters means the government is unable to create an environment which allows the necessary large-scale changes to happen. And as I've heard, and I welcome the fact that Paula Venels, the former chief executive of the Post Office, who was so heavily criticised by Justice Fraser, appears no longer to serve on the Cabinet Office board. But how on earth, or what did the government allow that appointment to be made? And why did it not act sooner to distance itself from those responsible for impacting the lives of so many? Madam Deputy Speaker, as we have heard, on the 26th of February, the Prime Minister, in answer to a question from my honourable friend, the member for Jarrow, appeared to commit to a full public inquiry into the Horizon scandal. When we hear from the Minister, I hope he will be able to provide more detail on the timescale and scope of this inquiry. Now, again, it is worth emphasising that litigation was brought to address the errors of a government-owned company. A civil servant sits on the board of Post Office. Its only shareholder is the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. So more should have been done to address the scandal before it was allowed to fester to this extent. Serious questions need to be answered about the relationship between the company and the government. The government appear to be content to act as the Post Office's parliamentary organ throughout this process, claiming that the December settlement was the end of the matter. Nothing could be further from the truth for the people still fighting for justice, and that is why we need a judge-led independent inquiry to take place as soon as feasibly possible. I just want to say a word about the Communication Workers Union, who identified flaws in the Horizon system back in 2015 and have worked hard to secure the inquiry and have said they are happy to work with us to ensure that it is timely and independent. So far, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have not seen any accountability for the lives and reputation that have been ruined. That is why securing this independent inquiry will be such a big victory for sub-postmasters, trade unions and justice. The government has failed to live up to its responsibility and prevent the scandal occurring. I hope the Minister has listened carefully to the excellent contributions on all sides and will use his influence to ensure justice is delivered for the hundreds of sub-postmasters wronged and to hold to account those responsible. Thank you.
Minister Paul Scully.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And first of all, may I congratulate the Honourable Member for North Durham, as well as the Honourable Friend for North West Leicestershire, who can't be here today, for securing today's important debate. And can I thank all Honourable Members for their contributions. It's been an excellent and heartfelt debate. We know that the government recognises the role of post offices, and that was articulated by my honourable friend from North Norfolk. And it's so important that we do make sure that we build on the network. There is no programme of closures. There's actually been 400 new post offices in the last few years, and I want to make sure that we can develop on that, although individual post offices may open, may close at various points. But I want to make sure that I've spent the rest of my time covering some of the questions, as many of the questions as possible that have been raised in this interesting debate. It's really impossible to ignore the impact that the litigation process has held on the post offices, postmasters affected and their families. I mean, we've heard today about Tom Brown, about Janet Skinner, Alan Bates, Cameron Ashraf, Siobhan Shea, Elizabeth Barnes and Jacqueline El-Kasabi, amongst others. All of these, as my honourable friend from Broadland said, are real people. These are not just people on a spreadsheet or on a list. They are individuals, their families have been affected by this. And so I will not hide, I will not wash my hands of this. It's so important that we do get as much done as possible, even if we cannot achieve everything that has been asked. But the Post Office has, I'm glad that it's accepted on the Horizon accounting system that they've got it wrong in the past in its dealings with a number of the postmasters, and has apologised. And the fact that there was a comprehensive resolution to the litigation following several days of respectful, challenging and ultimately successful mediation. I'm glad that we got to that, though a number of members have raised issues about where we go from here on. But beyond the financial settlement, the Post Office also committed to directly address past events for affected postmasters. And they'll also be shortly announcing, therefore, a scheme to address historic shortfalls for postmasters who were not part of the group litigation. And that scheme has been designed to offer a fair, fast and transparent means for postmasters to have their historic issues resolved. The further terms of the settlement has put the onus on the Post Office. I won't give way for 2 seconds, just so I can make sure I answer as many questions, but I may have time in a second. Put the onus on the Post Office to implement the necessary cultural and organisational changes highlighted by the litigation, which means that the company fostering a genuine commercial partnership with postmasters, because actually you have to clearly settle the past relationship with postmasters in order to look forward to make sure that postmasters in the future can have confidence with their relationship with the Post Office. And so that's important, that the necessary support for postmasters to operate branches successfully is available. And that includes newly established area managers to deliver support on the ground, an improved branch support centre to support teams throughout the UK, an overhaul of postmaster training, and above all, a further increase to postmaster remuneration, as we've heard earlier on. In terms of the management of the Post Office, there's also a new Chief Executive Officer and 2 new non-executive directors. So the leadership of the Post Office has changed significantly in the last few months as well as a result of the situation. I recognise the strength of the feelings surrounding this case, and that's why the government and I are determined to take the necessary steps to ensure lessons are learned from the Horizon litigation and that past issues will not be repeated. If you just bear with me for 2 seconds, because we talked about the independent review, and the Prime Minister mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. We are looking at the best ways to do this. There will be a further announcement as soon as possible in the very near future, and I know that members want to have progress on this, but I want to make sure that actually we get it right, rather than rushing into terms of reference and the detail at this point in time. What I want to make sure, and as I said, without hiding, without washing my hands, that we actually have something that means something to the postmasters that have been affected. I will give way briefly.
Does he agree with me that the most important issue here is for the wrongful convictions to be overturned, and you can't learn lessons and move forward if that's not addressed? Please, will he address that point?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and that's why the CCRC are actually looking at at those cases at the moment, and will therefore be able to refer those to the Court of Appeal accordingly. But that option is now available, which wouldn't normally be available without the CCRC looking at those cases. The Select Committee hearing we have next week and it's due to be held on the 24th of March, COVID notwithstanding, and I look forward to speaking to them at that point. But the government continues to proactively challenge the Post Office to restore and strengthen their relationship with postmasters and deliver the terms of the settlement. On a Monday, I met with the Post Office Chair and the CEO to seek assurances on those steps being taken, and I will, alongside officials, make sure that we keep them and their governance to account. In terms of the future governance, the Post Office is a large, complex and diverse business, and therefore it's important that it's allowed the commercial freedom to cooperate in the challenging markets it operates. But it must, however, be accountable to the government for its decisions, as we've heard. Following the litigation and the subsequent settlement, government will make sure that it monitors the Post Office closely to ensure that it delivers on its commitments to improve the organisation and relationship with postmasters. I won't for just 2 seconds because I'm running out of time, but I would like to stress that the government has a robust mechanisms in place now to maintain oversight of the Post Office that are regularly reviewed. As well as the regular meetings I have with the CEO and Chair, government has increased the frequency of wider shareholder meetings to ensure that, amongst other things, the actions arising out of the litigation can be tracked. UKGI, as the shareholder representative for Bays, challenges the Post Office on its corporate governance strategy and the stewardship of financial and other resources on behalf of the shareholder, as well as holding a non-executive seat of the Post Office Limited's board. The department has also recently expanded. I will give way if I've got a minute in a second. It recently expanded the Bays Post Office policy team that works closely with the UKGI in holding the Post Office to account at official level. We have a new framework document that makes sure that responsibilities of the account and accountabilities of the Post Office, Bays and UKGI are clearly defined. We'll publish this soon, and that will include an open and transparent information sharing agreement between government and the Post Office. I'll be meeting the Communications Workers Union, who's been referenced earlier on, at the end of the month to understand the views of postmasters. I look forward to that. But we'll also be tracking progress at the highest levels of the Post Office in quarterly ministerial meetings with the Chief Executive Office, Nick Reed. Governance arrangements between government and all its arm's-length bodies are regularly kept under review. Given the developments on the Post Office, government has considered and addressed all of these arrangements. The honourable member for North Durham talked about the right for Post Office to prosecute, and this was done under private prosecution that's available to individuals and companies, so it's not limited to the Post Office, but there is a continuing duty to disclose material information that comes to light in the future, so now, that might relate to the safety of any conviction. So actually, when we look at CCRC and other people that may have been convicted, they will be able to take that information to hand. I will write to the honourable gentleman when he talks about the serious case review team within the Post Office that he referred to go through a little bit more detail about that accordingly. In terms of questions around prosecuting the postmasters in the past, Bays did press management on these issues, instigating the review of the Post Office handling in 2015. It supported the second site mediation scheme. The Chair committed to the review in 2015, but it took all of that litigation for all of the facts to come to light. In terms of the suspense accounts that was referred to, Nick Reed, the Chief Executive, we will monitor this closely, but Nick Reed, the Chief Executive, wrote to Lord Arbuthnot on this just recently. Now, in terms of CCRC, and the convictions that the Honourable Lady for Newcastle East talked about, there is a meeting on 24th of March to consider these cases further. But to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to reassure the House that the Government is working hand in hand with Post Offices, the Post Office, postmasters and other stakeholders to ensure that lessons learned from the litigation and the steps following the settlement are followed through. And I look forward to sharing with you further the details about the review into this that was promised by the Prime Minister as soon as possible. But I'd like to just leave a minute for the honourable member of North Durham, if you'll to conclude. But I'd like to just thank all postmasters, those impacted by the litigation and those not, for the value that they add in providing an exceptional service to communities, people and businesses across the UK, and in terms of the contribution to this case. I thank honourable members once again for their contributions to this excellent debate and for their interest in the Post Office.
Kevin Jones.
Can I thank all honourable right members that have taken part in today's debate. Can I say one thing to the Minister? It's this, is do not just parrot what your civil servants are saying to you. It was not a comprehensive settlement in terms of the court case. He's admitted that the serious case review are settling cases that didn't bring cases forward. His own department don't even know what that was when we rang them this week. 2 of those cases have been settled in the last month for £300,000 each. So if we're going to get justice, same amount of compensation has got to be looked at those that actually took the case forward. Now, he has an opportunity here, and I've been a minister, and it's a great privilege. But it's not about sitting on that front bench or carrying the red box. It's about making a difference. He has an opportunity here to make a real difference and put a wrong right. What he can't do is just carry on with what his predecessors have done, ignored the truth. So I would challenge him, be brave, Minister, please put this right. It's in your hands. No matter what obstruction you get from your officials, challenge them.
Order. We now come to motion number 2 relating to the suspension of sittings in Westminster Hall. Minister to move.
To move.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as of that opinion, say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. The